All right. Today we're talking about why science is broken. Pretty straightforward. We're going to be going through the biggest problems facing the fields of science, the formal systems of science, and how to fix it, how to move us forward into the future with more awareness, more clarity, and more logical consistency, which is, in my opinion, the most important thing in regards to why science is having trouble. And you'll see why later on in the video. But first, we start off with the major claims, right? So you have Stephen Hawking saying philosophy is dead. We have Neil deGrasse Tyson calling philosophy useless and a distraction. Well, disrespectful, I'm not gonna lie. You got Richard Dawkins, strong atheist in the Epstein files, as we find out later. Philosophy failed to predict Darwin's. He has a hard-on for Darwin and apparently Epstein's Island as well. But he thinks that everything falls back to evolution, and that's why God doesn't exist. That's why, anybody who believes in a higher power is ridiculous or stupid, because evolution explains everything, science explains everything. I'm sure that Neil deGrasse Tyson would agree, and Hawking's tried to posit the same. He also was found on Epstein's Island. It's very interesting. Good for Tyson, holding it down. Not on Epstein's Island as we can see so far. But anyway, I digress. I don't want this to be too dated to this particular time in history. But you have these scientists, these men, these intellectuals, as they like to claim, saying philosophical claims. They're making philosophical claims discrediting the necessary nature of philosophy, which is self-refuting. It's contradictory. It doesn't make any sense. They're using philosophy to say philosophy is useless. These are not scientific claims. These are philosophical claims. These are opinions. Okay? So that is a problem because people don't realize that they're using philosophy, especially when they're shitting on philosophy or positing that it's no longer needed because we have biology and neuroscience and chemistry and physics and all those things, okay? So before I tear into science, I do want to give it its due, because I don't want to make the same mistake of these men, right? You got to give credit where it's due. Countless scientific achievements. This mode of communication, the fact that I can talk to you all on YouTube right now, is science. That is because of science. Like, we could not do this right now if it were not for technological advancements, medical advancements, technology, right? Biology, all of the amazing things that we get to enjoy as a mass species that acts somewhat as a cancer on this planet. But part of it's due to science, right? A lot of it's due to science. Predictions, production, expansion, right? Unfortunately, I believe that this has become pathological when it comes to our predictions, production, but more specifically our expansion, which I just kind of mentioned by calling us a cancer on the earth. And that kind of equates to this famous quote, right? Extreme power lacking wisdom. So we have this amazing, powerful tools applied and given to us by science, from science. But that comes with great power comes great responsibility. And that responsibility is rooted in philosophy. So we are furiously heading forward towards innovation and progression in scientific fields, technological fields, but we're not balancing that with wisdom and, in my opinion, logic and intelligence, right? So, but that just also isn't a problem for humanity and Earth as a whole, but it's also a problem for science itself, because science needs to be grounded in philosophy, and you'll see why. People don't realize this, right? So science is philosophy. It's a derivative of philosophy. It's a type of philosophy. All of the formal systems come from philosophy. This is why PhD is Doctor of Philosophy. PhD in biology, PhD in math, PhD in physics, astronomy, whatever. If you can get a PhD pretty much in any formal system. Maybe not anything, but you get the point. Most formal systems, you go to college, any major, probably has a PhD, and that's philosophy. Philosophy is the foundation of formal education, formal knowledge acquisition. Physics, chemistry, biology, neuroscience, all derivatives of philosophy. They don't teach you this in school, which is beyond ironic, because school is philosophy. School is rooted in philosophy. All presuppose philosophy asymmetrically. What that means is that All of these things need philosophy to operate, but philosophy does not need these things to operate because these are philosophy in its applications. This is applied philosophy. Specifically, it's applied logic and epistemology. All of these require epistemology and logic. Okay? So philosophy is the granddaddy, the big papa, the OG, the Mac Daddy that's been disrespected. And some scientists will say, well, okay, yeah, philosophy was the beginning. But that's archaic. It's outdated. It's like my grandfather. He needed to go, right? Okay, that's a fair assumption, but completely wrong because at every step of every single one of these disciplines, they are employing aspects of philosophy. Let me explain. Okay, so philosophy and science. Logic is philosophy. It's a type of philosophy. For us to exist, for anything to exist, the structure of manifest reality is logical. If it wasn't, it doesn't exist. The law of non-contradiction, simple. No circular grounding, simple. Okay? Positive content, no null label, which I talked about in my past video, my most recent video, where I had a logical proof for God. Logic is the creme de la creme, the king, the fundamental ground of knowledge and knowing anything. But to exist as something requires logic. Epistemology, to know anything, it is the system of acquiring knowledge to know something, to say, I know this to be true. That's epistemology. So science require the thing that science observes and studies and investigates, grounded in logic. The practice and methods of knowing things, figuring out how to know something, is epistemology, philosophy. Normativity. These are values, right? To have true or false, to make a claim that, hey, the Big Bang happened, that's true. That's normativity, that's philosophy. Right? It's applied philosophy. To say quantum mechanics is true, or to say you have cancer, that's true. It's a truth claim. You have cancer, or you don't have cancer, right? Or to say something is false, trust the science. Trust the science, that's normativity. Trust us. That's not science, that's philosophy. Principle of sufficient reason. So this is about asking why. It's all about inquiry. Principle of sufficient reason just says, if you see something, if you're observing something, there's going to be a deeper cause. There's going to be a deeper reason why that thing exists. There has to be a deeper ground that stands on. You know, principle of sufficient reason for me, what was my cause? My mom. I came out of my mom, right? Or, you know, because my dad came out of his mom, and you get the point. Principle of sufficient reason means that there's something beneath, there's a cause. All of science, when you're asking, oh, how does this work? Why is the sky blue, right? Why does ice hurt my skin, right? What is cancer? How do you cure cancer? What is that? Why is the moon bright at night? Or why does the sun move across the sky in certain ways? These are all operating principle of sufficient reason. Now, unfortunately, for some reason, physicists in particular like to stop at a certain point and say, okay, that's enough principle of sufficient reason. We've used it all the way up until this point, but now that we can't really answer certain tough questions like the hard problem or the origins of the universe or the origins of life coming from dead matter, right? Or the Big Bang coming from nothing. Because we can't answer those questions using physics, we're just going to say, that's where it stops. We've decided for everybody. How thoughtful. They've decided for everybody that we're not going to go further than that. Okay. But you need that. You need that to get to even physics, to get to the photon, the most fundamental, basic particle thing in the universe. Criteria of explanation. So what is the criteria of an explanation that we determine is good or bad? Judging it, judgment, judging, oh, that explanation for the origins of the universe is good or bad, depending on who you're asking. Oh, the explanation for the arising of consciousness out of the brain, neuroscience, is that good or bad? That's philosophy. Okay? The scientific method is applied philosophy. You do not have the scientific method without philosophy. That is what that is. Simple. I mean, so hopefully I've driven the point home that, that philosophy is at every part of the scientific process and at every part of existence itself. And you can do logic without doing any of these things. Math, same thing. Math is rooted in logic. Math is also rooted in philosophy, logic. Without logic, you have no math. So you can do philosophy without doing math or any of these other formal systems. But you can't do any of these formal systems and math without philosophy. That's why it's the Mac Daddy, it's the OG, the big papa. So there's this circularity going on within modern academia and the scientific community as of late. Unfortunately, beginning somewhere around the Enlightenment period. So what they do is they come in and they say, there's only physical things exist. Anything that we can pattern with our physical things or just observing our senses, that's what exists. That's existence, okay? And they only use physical instruments. So if our biological instruments, our senses, 5 senses can't detect it, and our super sophisticated Higgs boson and all the other instruments that we've created, if they can't detect it, it does not exist. Period. Okay? Very sophisticated failure of object permanence, which is something babies have, right? The baby thinks the mother's face is her entire existence, so if the baby can't see the face, it doesn't exist. But that's from the baby's perspective, because the baby can't perceive the mother's existence if the baby can't see the face. The same goes for our sophisticated academics and scientists because we can't use our super sophisticated, expensive tools and instruments to detect something, it doesn't exist. Fascinating. Physical instruments can only detect physical properties. 3-dimensional instruments can't detect anything that transcends 3-dimensional space. So you have created an artificial barrier and blocked yourself off from detecting anything that could possibly transcend 3-dimensional space-time because you only will use things that are within 3-dimensional space-time. And you're going to think, okay, well, isn't everything within 3-dimensional space-time? No. You can use other things. So what I did, I used logic in my last video to prove God exists because you can use other things to transcend. There's not many. There's only 3 things that I can think of. Maybe there's something I'm missing, but there's 3 things you can use to detect and prove things that transcend space-time. And it's not physics. It's not direct observation using our 5 senses. It's not that. I can assure you of that. So with all that, you conclude only physical patterns exist. But then you have a problem too, which is quantum mechanics is the physical instruments hitting a boundary it can't cross, using particles to detect particles. This is why quantum mechanics makes no sense, because you're using objects created and made up of particles to detect the most finite, the fundamental particles in existence. Okay? So this is why it's like, oh, it does it. The particles are popping, photons are popping into existence. No, they're not popping into existence. Just like the mom isn't popping into existence when she uncovers her face. She was always there. It's just the baby couldn't perceive her before. Because our instruments are what we determine as our barrier of what exists and does not exist, anything that transcends that automatically doesn't exist. So that's why when photons come in out of no existence, we're like, whoa, paradoxes. This makes no sense. Wow. No, the photon existed, just not from your perspective. You have to, from a higher perspective, from a higher dimension, the photon already existed. It's indeterminate from your perspective. Schrodinger's cat. Indeterminate from where you're standing doesn't mean that it's indeterminate where anyone would ever stand at any level of existence. Okay? But this challenges the thought that is inherent in modern academia and science that space-time is fundamental. You can guess I don't agree with that take, if that isn't obvious. I think that's the one big problem why science is broken currently. Science is philosophy. Oh, I already went over that. Evidence is broken. Evidence that it's broken, right? I just made that claim, right? Science is broken. Well, look, we've made a lot of progress. United States just left the World Health Organization. People are curing cancer now, like hand over foot. They can't cure cancer enough. They're making a lot of amazing scientific advancements, and I do not disagree. I'm not saying that progress is not being made, even though a lot of problems have been due to technology and the way that it destroys ourselves and the earth, but we're not going to get into that. Okay, but that's a whole other thing. That's going back to the great power. With great power comes great responsibility kind of concept we're talking about here, right? Well, evidence that it's broken. So you have the Big Bang, something from nothing. Makes no sense. Big Bang, origin of the Big Bang, strong emergence, makes no sense, impossible. Abiogenesis, that explanation makes no sense. As the beginning of the universe, nothing coming before it. Not saying the Big Bang does not exist. I'm saying the Big Bang as an explanation as the beginning of the universe makes no sense and is impossible. Abiogenesis, life coming from non-life, strong emergence, again, no sense, impossible. Consciousness coming from no consciousness. You can see a pattern, strong emergence, very consistent. This thing that doesn't have something magically produces it through complexity or through time for no reason other than time and complexity, which is just no labels placed onto something that they have no idea what's going on. Speaking of no labels, placebo, mind over matter. Framework inherently is that matter produces consciousness or creates consciousness, generates consciousness. The brain magically does it for whatever reason. Matter gets in a certain way, configuration, and then voila, like Frosty the Snowman comes to life, and now you're a sentient, conscious being because complexity and time. But how do we explain placebo? Because now your beliefs and your state of consciousness is affecting your physiology. It's going backwards, the opposite way you would think if the mind was generating matter. If matter was generating the mind, as opposed to what I believe, which is the mind constraining itself into matter. Dark energy, dark matter. I mean, 95% of the universe is, might as well call it a placebo. Obviously, there's a lot of math that is going into this belief, but there's also a large assumption that general relativity extrapolates out to the entire universe. Okay? And dark energy is even worse because another thing of extrapolating out and saying, well, maybe there's a rounding error. Maybe the math isn't as airtight as you thought. They're like, no, 95% of the universe is just stuff we can't detect, but it's there because our models are perfect and we're not going to change them. And then you got a DSM-5. You have all of these mental disorders that are purely correlational, purely observational, which is really what science is observational and correlational, with no cures and no causes. They don't know the concrete causes of any of the DSM-5 disorders. They don't know how to cure any of it. There's no cures. There's only drugs and CBT and talk therapy. And occasionally some people will venture out into doing alternative forms of healing, which have actually found a lot of benefits, like psychedelics. But yeah, I mean, DSM-5, psychiatry is in a crisis. Reliability, validity crisis, replicability. It's a mess, okay? And it's, to be honest, in a lot of cases, arbitrary. I mean, being a homosexual was part of the DSM-5 in the 70s, so you can tell that it's culturally mediated. It depends on the culture and the time. It's vibes, right? There's no biological markers. There's no concrete causes that exist outside of probability. And the most important thing is a cure. No cures for any of these disorders. So science is really, really on thin ice in the year 2026, especially now with all the things that are coming out in the world. Then we have even further problems for science, especially physics. I'm going to be picking on physics a little bit because physics likes to step into philosophy's domain more than anyone else. Neuroscience is coming up there with that consciousness bullshit, but physics is really, really stepping out of their lane, and they're doing bad philosophy, in my humble opinion. So you got the photon, fundamental carrier of electromagnetic interactions, patterns. Physics tracks patterns through time. Physics presupposes time because it tracks patterns. So physics does. So physics needs time to be physics. Proper time is 0, photon. Proper distance, 0, space-time interval 0. So the numbers are breaking down for photons. Photons are kind of doing whatever they want. They're going around entangling across unknown distances. They are being emitted and then absorbed and not experiencing time, at least from our best estimations, our best guesses. So the measurements terminate in photon detection. What this is pointing to is that light is the boundary of three-dimensional reality. Photons are not bounded by space-time. This is mathematically proven. Because that is what proves stuff, by the way, and we'll get to that later. Math can prove things. Science can't prove things. Science does not prove anything. I know, might come to a shock. Math can prove things, logic can prove things. Science does not prove shit. Hate to break it to you. Okay? It can fail to falsify something. It can provide evidence for something, but it is falsifiable. And if something is falsifiable, that means it's not proven. That means it's a theory. This is why you have theories in science. And then when the math comes, then it becomes a law. Same with logic. We can go deeper into this problem too. So the point of the photon was saying, hey, there's this thing, photon, that does not operate within space-time in the way that we know it. So how can space-time and matter be fundamental if there's this thing like the photon, which seems to be able to transcend and operate outside or at the very edge of space and time, and also pop in and out of existence? So, I mean, unless we're saying strong emergence every time, the photon is probably going somewhere that transcends space and time. So it's not bounded by this physical reality we exist in. So we have something that comes into our existence that we know for a fact is not bounded by space and time. You could also say same things for the mind, the thoughts, right? Archetypes. These are more evidence, empirical evidence that space and time are not fundamental. It's not all there is. There's something else going on in a higher dimension or a higher realm, astral spirit realm, whatever you want to call it. Tons of empirical evidence, including the photon. Closed system. The laws of thermodynamics is applied to the universe. This isn't every scientist, but this is a little more popular than you would think it would be because it doesn't really make sense. You'll see why. So there's kind of this idea of the universe started at a certain point, which created space-time, but for something to start something, it needs time, but it starts time, so that doesn't make any sense. But the Big Bang starts everything, and space comes out of nowhere, and time comes out, but there's something before time. So then you have the universe, and it's a closed system, which is an assumption. There's no empirical evidence. There's no mathematical proof. And I can assure you I've used logic. There's no logical proof that this is a closed system. It is a pure assumption that the universe is a closed system. What is a closed system? It's like a box, like steel box, computer. Originally, the laws of thermodynamics began with people in the 19th century looking at steam engines. And so they said, hey, this steam engine acts in a certain way. Let's take those principles and apply it to the entire universe that we exist in, because the universe must be a giant steam engine or a giant machine. They said, yeah, this closed system. But again, assumption, not rooted in anything. Every closed system we've ever observed, humans have ever observed, empirically, so empirical evidence, ever, is a product of intelligent design. It's a fact. So they're saying that the universe is a closed system. We're headed towards heat death because of entropy. But there's no designer and there's no intelligence that designed it. Now, I'm not even positing, I don't even believe there's an external designer that made the universe like a craftsman. I believe something different. But when it comes to empirical evidence and aligning with what we observe on an everyday basis, the closed system points to an intelligent designer. Nature never produces closed systems. It's all open systems. And if there is a closed system, like a computer, like a box, like a steam engine, it decays. We call that entropy, system decay, right? Closed system decays, so they think, oh, the universe is going to decay because we always see closed systems in nature decay, even though most of nature is open. But what's really happening, if you just use your mind, use your intellect, use logic, specifically use logic, which is the most powerful tool we have in our minds, what really is happening is that it's reintegrating back to source, reintegrating back to the whole. A closed system is a temporary transient thing. It is not a permanent thing. So a closed system turns into an open system over time. It's returning back to nature, to its natural state. All right? Physics chooses an assumption, which is that the universe is a closed system. Not all physicists, I'm not positive. Everybody, just saying. But the heat death of we're headed towards heat death. Big Bang had a certain amount of energy. We're running out of that energy. I mean, that's a mainstream belief. That's not fringe. Physics chooses assumption over empirical evidence, right? Assuming the universe is a closed system directly contradicts what we observe on a day-to-day basis. We observe nature, only open systems. And when we do have a closed system, it's because there's an intelligent designer and it always decays into an open system eventually. Like a dead body decays back into the earth, back into nature, the cycle of life, or there's some kind of term I'm forgetting, but yeah, the cycle of life or something like that. Circle of life. Do I keep saying it? Circle of life. Yeah, I said cycle. Circle. And so now you're probably seeing a pattern of special exceptions, because the problem here is that these things I'm about to list off directly contradict what modern academia and science needs to do those things, right? They need exceptions. So they say, in all these other cases, this can happen. But when it comes to consciousness, strong emergence happens, something coming from nothing. When it comes to the Big Bang, give us the Big Bang, give us a miracle. Something coming from nothing never happens again. Life coming from non-life, we've never observed that. We've never seen that before. We've never seen something coming from nothing. We've never seen dead matter magically turn into life. They're trying to do experiments to get that to happen, even though that all that would do would just prove that you need an intelligent designer to have an experiment to turn dead matter into life, which would kind of self-refute in a way, because if you're doing an experiment to see if non-life can turn into life, all you're proving is that you need an intelligent designer to turn non-life into life. From their perspective, I think everything's alive, but that's watch the last video if you want to get into that. Strong emergence of life, like I just said, right? Closed system universe. Exception. Everything we observe is open, except for things that are closed are due to us. But the universe is a closed system. So give us that exception. Placebo of mind affecting matter, right? The mind, consciousness strongly emerges from the mind and from matter, from dead matter. From their perspective, they believe matter's all dead and unconscious. There's no consciousness in it at all. And they say magically it emerges, but then you have the placebo where the mind is affecting the matter, affecting the body. Okay, interesting. Then you have the fine-tuning problem. It's a miraculous coincidence, right? No, they explain that coincidence away by saying multiverse. They say, oh, there's an infinite timeline, so of course, at some point, all the perfect things went together to make what we see here, and then they drop in a little bit of the anthropic principle and say, or whatever it's called, anthropic perspective argument, and say, and if, every universe where life couldn't exist, we're not in, of course, we're in the perfect universe, because if it was not, we would not be around to say, wow, look at everything. Everything's so well aligned. But for that, you need an infinite multiverse. So you fine-tuning, you need the universe to be open now, because you need infinite universes. And they need to be within something, right? These multiverses need to exist in space somehow, or exist in something. They're contained by something. Closed for thermodynamic heat death. So they need the universe to be closed for their heat death theory. The universe is a closed machine, but then also it's part of this multiverse thing of all these different possibilities that have to be contained in something. Okay? So it's kind of like pick your poison. Again, contradiction, logic. This is illogical. These are illogical theories and hypotheses and assumptions they're positing as valid explanations that snub any metaphysical declarations, maybe from an Eastern philosopher like Lao Tzu or Buddha. Space-time is fundamental, except for the entire field of quantum mechanics. So they're like, space-time is fundamental, they need it. For any of this to happen, for strong emergence or any emergent like that, you need time to be fundamental. You need linear time to be fundamental. For the Big Bang to be the beginning of the universe, you need time to be fundamental, even though you also have time emerging from the Big Bang before there was time, but you need time for something to emerge. So again, you can see the circular problem going on here with the Big Bang Theory as the beginning of the universe. Not existing, but as the beginning start, not coming from anything else. Quantum mechanics poo-poos that idea, right? I talked about the photons, you have quantum tunneling, you have retrocausality being observed, Bell's theorem going on, or entanglement going on. Like there's just all this stuff happening that's like, hey, maybe space-time is not fundamental. Maybe that's a strong assumption that you are constantly running into and it's holding you back from really realizing that, hey, maybe there's higher orders of reality going on here, okay? The modern scientific narrative requires linear space-time as fundamental, with a beginning that came from nothing, the Big Bang, and an end we've never observed in nature, which is heat death, or closed system decaying into nothing, which is, closed system universe that's contained in nothing. This is bad philosophy. Hopefully my snarky attitude and sarcastic tone was able to drive that point home to you, that this is just really bad philosophy in general when it comes to modern academia and the scientific structure, as it will. Because there's a lot of contradictions, circular grounding, circular explanations, null labels like placebo. You're just placing a label on something, you have no idea what's going on, right? Emergence, strong emergence, consciousness emerging from the brain, arising, you're like, I don't know, dark energy, dark matter. That means certain things need to change, certain things need to be assessed and determined if, are they valid or are they not? I mean, that's philosophy, by the way. That's a philosophical principle that needs to be applied to science. So here's the real hierarchy that might ruffle some feathers because people don't really think about it. So this is physics and science, just in general, but physics is the most popular and the most contentious when it comes to philosophy. So, you got to sun them a little bit. So at the top is logic. You can prove things with logic, as I said before. Then it goes down to math. Math needs logic to exist. Logic does not need math to exist. Proof. You can prove things with math. That's how theories become laws or become proven. They can do predictions, but mostly it's rooted in math. This is why Einstein became super famous. He was theorizing stuff, but until math came along, nobody really gave a shit. And also he proved, I think it was some observations during eclipses. Physics, empirical evidence. This is observations, but it's falsifiable. Logic is self-validating, meaning that you cannot use logic. There's nothing more fundamental than logic. You can't use logic. You can't disprove logic or refute logic or argue against logic without using it. Math is a formal system. It's necessary once you agree with the axioms, but it cannot self-ground itself. Gödel's incompleteness theorem proved this using math, saying, hey, math needs something a little bit more underneath it to exist. Logic. If you have no logic, you have no math. And then physics. Physics needs math, right? To prove anything in physics, you need math. But it's falsifiable. That means it's subject to revision. So for anybody who's a physicalist or a materialist who believes, hey, reality is whatever physics tells us, that's the bedrock of reality. Well, you've determined that the foundation of reality is falsifiable, subject to revision, subject to review, which means that it is not fundamental by definition, because math is more fundamental and logic is more fundamental. Science must use and be grounded by philosophy. There's no escape. Logic is philosophy. Nowhere to run. Sorry about it. Okay? So again, science is amazing. Only reason why I can talk to you right now is because of science. But science needs to get a reality check of like, it starts with philosophy. And if the philosophy is good, if the logic is grounded and good, the downstream effects are good. But if the foundation is faulty, like space-time is fundamental, linear time is fundamental, everything started with the Big Bang, right? Life came from non-life. Consciousness is an emergent principle, property from the brain, from matter, from dead matter, unconscious matter. In your opinion, it's unconscious and dead. Well, then you're gonna have problems. You're gonna have paradoxes and problems. Paradoxes just means there's an error. Hard problems just means there's an error. Unsolvable questions and just means that you need to shift your paradigm. It's a paradigm shift that's needed. So science needs a paradigm shift. Science is broken because it is doing bad philosophy while pretending it isn't using philosophy at all, saying it doesn't need it anymore, even though it's a derivative of philosophy. Presenting empirical evidence, which is observational and correlational, as proof. Science is correlational and observational. That's what science is. And it doesn't prove anything. It fails to disprove something, and it is always subject to revision. That is the major tenet. That's what they hang their hat on. Hey, science is falsifiable. That's why you should trust it. Ironically enough, that's why you should question it, always. And if somebody says, hey, I've used science to prove that God doesn't exist or there's nothing beyond three-dimensional space, well, hey, Buster, you've already claimed to me that that's falsifiable, that that's subject to review. So in 50 years from now, that's probably going to be wrong. Our reality is going to be shifted because science is under review. Logic is not under review. Logic is logic. Law of non-contradiction is going to work forever. No label work forever. No circular grounding forever. Math, if you accept that 2 is 2 and the values of things forever, it exists outside of time. Time needs logic and math. Physics requires time. Physics is downstream from time. Math, logic come before time. Not really come before time temporally, but fundamentally, foundationally, okay? So only math, logic prove things, faulty foundations. So what they really need to do is become more logically consistent and check the logic. They need to say, hey, does this follow? Is this contradictory? Is this circular? Am I applying a no label like placebo or emergence to something that I have really no idea what's going on? Dark energy, dark matter. Am I just covering up a hole and not looking at the problem directly? And if you see paradoxes and you see unsolvable problems, that means you need a paradigm shift. Not, oh, I guess that's how reality is, and I'm just going to throw my hands up and walk away. All right, so I'm sure I've pissed some people off. I usually do. It is a gift. I would love to hear your thoughts. If you agree, disagree, whatever it may be, I'll do my best to respond. We'll see how popular this gets anyway. And I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.